managed by a trade commissioner, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner, who's responsible for deploying our resources in those markets. And deployment of those resources are really where we think there are significant opportunities for UK businesses, either by kind of accessing inward investment to add to our supply chains, or certainly from my point of view, opening up doors for new opportunities. And we also have a series of overseas delivery partners in some markets that deliver our services. So China British Business Council is one example of that in China, where they have 13 offices and they deliver some of our SME support in those markets. Next slide, please. So I'm going to cover a little bit now about sort of trade policy, and I talked to you about trade policy. And one of the kind of really real benefits of kind of the trade policy environment, which is a new function that we didn't have for 40 years, which was is to be able to negotiate and develop a positive trading policy environment for the UK. Next slide, please. So this is one of the functions that we brought together, and we rapidly have expanded our trade policy functions across across the world and in Whitehall. And we have a series of teams of negotiators, of trade policy development people, all looking at positive opportunities for the UK. We have some 68 deals, sometimes known as trade policy deals or trade deals, and the 69th trade deal is with Europe, which is of much topic and in the is much discussion in the news at this point in time. And what I wanted to show you in this map, which is this is a diagram of by the International Monetary Fund of global growth between 2020 and 2026. And the focus of this schematic is that the darkest areas are those areas that are growing the quickest. So you'll see in most in parts of Africa, Latin America, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, there are significant growth trajectories projected globally. And what we've also overlaid on there are where our trade deals are being either we have existing trade deals, or we're currently negotiating new free trade agreements, or we have or we are starting a trade negotiation in the future. So Canada and Mexico and so on, these were pre-existing agreements that were held by the EU that we have reframed in a UK context. We're negotiating at the moment the US trade agreement, Australia and New Zealand, which we hope to be talking about very soon. And of course, actually, Japan was the first big trade agreement that we delivered that came into force this year. 1st of January 2021. And then the CPTPP, which is the Comprehensive and Progressive Trade Partnership agreement, is an agreement of 13 countries worth about 40% of the world's GDP that will deliver, we think will deliver significant trade benefits in the future. So this is just going to give you a sense of where some of those trade deals are being applied. Next slide, please. And just kind of building on the trade deals, that I just wanted to kind of emphasize the Japan trade deal, which, as I said, came into force earlier this year, and how you can take advantage of it. I know the next speaker will touch a little bit on the importance of trade deals in doing business overseas, and I think it's really important that you get as much information as possible to help you with your plans. You can get information in a range of ways from various sources. From a government perspective, we put an awful lot of work online. So we have a sort of a big primary government site called gov.uk, www.gov.uk. which has lots of information on not only on trade deals, but on general trade activity. So if you want to know about export licensing, or you want to know about market entry conditions, barriers, challenges, conditions for doing business, a whole range of sort of resources are based either on that portal or on a great portal, which I'll mention in a few slides. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I talked about the overseas partners in some of the markets. In Japan, we have an overseas partner that helps deliver our program, and they're called Export Japan. They also happen to be an export champion for the Midlands, which we're very proud of. And their role is to support us to help SMEs access the market in Japan. And it's worth just noting that 84% of the business that Britain does with Japan is done by SMEs. And as part of our negotiation on the trade deal, we negotiated a specific trade chapter that would be beneficial for SMEs. And then the third point I would make would be the international trade advisors that you're able to access. So we have a team of international trade advisors up and down the country, have about 350 or so in different parts of the country. There should be one near you. And if you contact your trade advisor, they'll be able to give you advice on various elements of exporting, including where to find out more information on trade deals. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to just kind of walk you through a series of kind of practical business support programs that we have that you can access through through multiple channels, and I'll go through those. Next slide, please. The primary channel that we have is www.great.gov.uk, and that's a portal that has a lot of our content on exporting. So as I said before, in terms of market entry or market conditions or trade barriers, if you want to register a trade barrier, for example, so you have an issue with a market, a location or market, there's a function for registering that. That's important, so we understand those barriers when we're negotiating deals. If you want a market guide, and there's actually now a self-help tool. This screenshot probably needs to be updated because the site has kind of evolved from here, but there's now a self-help tool to help you navigate through some of our services. And of course, there was an awful lot of information below, so what you can see there on COVID, the impact of COVID, as well in terms of the trading environment. So this is one of the big kind of ways into accessing our support. Next slide, please. So this slide is a little bit busy, but this will kind of give you a kind of an overview of some of our support services. So first point to make, I'll go from left to right, which will help, I think, in terms of kind of helping the eye cast over the page. But the point I'll make is that all of this is available on great.gov.uk. So if you miss some of the points I make in detail, you just go there and you'll be able to navigate these sites. On the left-hand side, you have a lot of the national support services, things like our guide, online advice and guidance. So we have sort of static areas where we have lots of information, collateral information on different bits of information that you need to export. We have a service called Export Opportunities, which is really, really valuable, which is a service where you can put in your sector and your market of interest, market being country of interest, and then you can receive a series of lists of opportunities, so real-time opportunities in that country, in that sector. And you can also sign up for email alerts to be simply alerted. I haven't looked today. Normally I do when I do these presentations, but they're normally about 14,000 or so opportunities on that portal at any one time. You can also set up a business profile on there as well and be contacted, which is a sort of external way of looking at your business, as well as having something called selling online overseas, which is a way to access the right e-commerce portal overseas. The second column is really the local support, the localized support. This is available across England. The ITAs are something called International Trade Advisors, and they're really at the centre of our support. So they are people that have been in business and that have now got sort of effectively second careers and working for government to help advise other businesses how to learn the lessons they've learned, and also to help guide you to make the most effective decisions within the time constraints. We have funds like the Internationalisation Fund, which is a grant fund, which we match on a 50-50 basis. So you can get between £1,000 and £9,000 on a 50-50 basis. So a project of £18,000 could draw down £9,000, for example, to internationalise your business. And that could be accessing consultancy. That could be optimizing your website. It could be trade visits, trade show, and so on. So a whole range of things. I'll talk about Export Academy, and in some regions you have levelling up support, which are providing additional specialist advisors in key sectors that are appropriate for the regions. The third column is really about trade fairs, about movement. So this has been actually quite largely affected by COVID, but we are starting to see the signs of businesses now wanting to travel, wanting to go to trade shows physically. And actually, we would say that trade is a sort of contact sport. Industrial trade is a contact sport, and I know that you've got speakers on here who will probably say the same. But in the absence of being able to do that, we put together a whole range of virtual options that allow people to still do business. So meet buyers, find out information, engage, and so on. And then the final strand is our e-exporting segment, if you like, which is the where we help businesses do business overseas. So, and I always say this, not everybody does business online through Amazon and eBay. There are 450 e-marketplaces across the world, and one of the things that we do is we help businesses to place highly on their search engines. So Mercado Libre, for example, T9 in China, a whole range of other options. And we also negotiate with those marketplaces in some cases for specific deals for UK businesses. Next slide, please. Hopefully I'm keeping to time. I'm coming quite close to the end now. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the Export Academy, UK Export Academy, which you'll be hearing more about in a few weeks' time when we sort of formally go to launch on the Export Academy. But essentially, I kind of describe this as a sort of a boot camp, if you like, for exporters. So this is primarily designed for exporters that are new or reacting, where export is not currently a large part of the business, but they want to know more. Has changed, or you've got a kind of an overseas inquiry. And what this does is it kind of provides an online resource of up to 15 hours over a 12 to 15 week period, where you can go on and get certain sort of updates and training sessions on various elements of the basics of exporting. So, importance of getting paid, or how do I select the right market? Importance of trade shows, or how do free trade agreements work? How do Incoterms and the sort of the ways and the processes that you need to cover in order to do business? Those sorts of things are all sort of covered in this course. It's an online course that you go through, and as you come out of it with a number of practical solutions and actions, you then develop an action plan, which then helps you to focus your energy overseas, because the world, by definition, is a very big place, and if you're not careful, you can spend an awful lot of time doing work that isn't doesn't add value to your core purpose. So next slide, please. The final thing I wanted just to kind of feature on was the new service that we launched last week. So this is very, very current, which was called the Export Support Service for Business. And this is currently it will develop as a sort of fact-based hotline service for businesses. So it is really primarily designed at this phase of its development to focus on supporting your business to do business in Europe. So you're able to access a call center effectively that will give you guidance on various elements of trading in Europe. It has been led by the department, but it isn't a resource. It's a cross-government facility. So we are working with HMRC, we are working with DEFRA, we're working with BAYS, the Foreign Office, a whole range of kind of departments are behind this. And what it will do is give you kind of answers to really kind of practical questions around moving your goods and services around Europe. There will be a series of information. There'll be a sort of a one-to-one or a sort of call center kind of approach, and there'll be an ability to put slightly more complex questions to that support service as well. And that service can be accessed through the website you see there on the bottom, or by dialing that number, and then a member of the team will be then will pick up your questions, try to respond to them, including referring you into some of the sites of support that I mentioned earlier a few slides ago as well. And I think that's it. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. I just want to say thank you to UKBA for giving me the opportunity to speak and to cover some of the items that are available through government support. There are a whole host of other actors that provide international trade advice, and we work with them all. But if you do need to get in touch with us or want to access one of our services, please just use the Great portal, and you'll be able to go through our sort of effectively our shop window, and then access the right support for your business to grow and to internationalise. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Very grateful for that and for the information that you've provided this morning. And just to remind everyone that copies of the slides and contact details, etc., will be going out after the event. Our next speaker is Mike Wallace of Keswick Enterprises Group, who's going to be talking to us about the logistics that businesses need to consider whilst trading internationally. Mike is the executive chairman of Spatial Global and a main board director of the Keswick Enterprises Group since 2005, and has other business interests connected to the logistics world. He's worked alongside the fashion and textile trades, retail, grocery, food and drink sectors, and many others. He's worked in logistics operating all over the world and highly experienced in supply chain issues, which is very apt considering recent news on this very vital issue. Mike, I'm looking forward to your talk, and then after Mike's talk, we'll be taking questions for both Mike and Ian. So, Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Elliot, and good morning to everybody. I know that some of you are already shipping, some of you are going to be new to this, so we're trying to take you through what I call good practice for shippers, which mostly I get from the good customers I've worked with. And I know as a freight forwarder that knowledgeable customers with good processes in their business, working with a freight forwarder, that gets the best results in terms of trade and good physical movements that need to be done. There's no need to keep secrets in this industry anymore. Next slide, please. These are just the topics we're covering today. We can't deal with them all in very much detail. You will see in the last slide, which is going to be copied to you, a bunch of links to information, the type of which Ian has referred to, a lot of government resources that we use as a freight forwarder to keep ourselves up to date, but also just in terms of finding some of the basic information about doing trade around the world in both directions that you need to know from time to time. During the talk as well, I'll also cover the current market, which you probably all heard know what's going on, various things in terms of delays and costs. Next slide, please. In terms of trade, this really is the first base of doing trade both directions, whether you're importing or you're exporting. Ian referred to Incoterms, and they were updated just in 2020. Not many changes, but one or two that would be worth noting when you look into them. And this is really the terms of trade that you deal with your suppliers or your customers and determine who is responsible for what and when, right? And to start with, the first thing that it determines is when does the transfer of ownership take place? Yeah, so if you're buying X works somewhere or you're selling X works, then it happens at the factory gate and you would expect some payments to be made then. It also affects who is going to insure the goods and where from, okay? So the important thing is to understand the options of the terms of trade. And I'll show you a table in a second that illustrates some of the different responsibilities along the way. And for you to understand what the different parts are, then which parts would you want to control? Do you want to control the physical movement and the cost related to freight? Do you want to control the customs activity? Do you want to control the domestic issues in places like South America, Africa, and other difficult places to trade? Sometimes it makes sense to do it differently in different lanes. And a freight forwarder, and I would certainly advise you in certain places to keep control. In other places where it works very, very smoothly, then it's much more common to use the usual terms of trade that you'd have heard of, FOB, DAP. What you should always be doing is asking your forwarder for advice in terms of that choice and what the real responsibility means. There's documents related to it as well. And you can see all of those things through the government, through the Chamber of Commerce, or through your freight forwarder. Next slide, please. This is the table that I referred to. So along the top column there, you'll see the terms of trade, Ex Works, FCA, FAS, along the right to DDP. So if you were buying something in China, you buying Ex Works would be taking control pretty immediately. If you were selling something to China and you go to the right on DDP, you would be controlling things pretty much entirely. What you need to determine and what you need to understand is what are the important bits in terms of the costs related to, the documents related to, and therefore the negotiations you need to have and the actions you need to make across what can be obviously an elongated process. So you could be a couple of months in terms of actually moving some goods around the world, depending on where they're going. But this is a table you will find easily in the Incoterms book that I referred to there, and a link later, and it's certainly the starting point for you to make your decisions. Next slide, please. One of the other things you really need to understand is how does the industry and the people involved in making international movements work, how do they understand freight? And so that is really two things. That's the carriers that move the goods, and then the customs authorities at both ends that process the goods from administrative point of view, from legality, tax, duties, etc., etc. So it's important to understand, and when you're talking to your freight forwarder, that you know what your goods are classed as. So if it's just general dry cargo, foodstuffs obviously have different standards of controls. Temperature control required a different type of movement. And then there's hazardous, various types of hazardous and dangerous goods. And then there are things that are what we call out of gauge. So large pieces of equipment, factory equipment, or large things. And there are multiple different ways of shipping those things. It's important for you to understand it and understand how that might impact you. So for instance, on hazardous goods, you can ship them. You can even fly some pretty dangerous goods on airplanes, but you have to do it in a certain way, in a pack that's got a limited size and of a certain type, okay? So important for you to get to understand that. And again, lots of resources out there to help you do that. Then the other thing, from the customs point of view, understand what your product is from a customs. What is the commodity code that your products move under? You'll have heard, maybe have heard of a thing called an HS code. So there is a specific code that your product will come under. And it might come under several subsections. So it could easily be fashion and then run all the way down to some sort of cotton t-shirt. It's very important to understand that. And the reason being is that then puts you in control of what you are instructing your freight forwarder, customs agents, or the carrier, if you're doing it direct, what to use. So to understand the CPC at the bottom of the screen there, the customs process code. To understand what is it? Is it just a standard straightforward import or export, or is it one of the various types of a different process. I show to there an IPR and OPR, and that is an inbound processing relief and an outbound processing relief. So if you've got goods that are coming in that you're going to process and turn into something something different, and then you're going to export it, you need to import it on the right code in the first place to avoid things like double duties. Similarly, you would have heard and maybe even seen with the EU Brexit issues, talk of double taxation because of goods that have come in from Germany. You're now going to send them back and you end up paying double tax. There's a thing in the customs code called a return goods relief that avoids those issues. But you need to make sure that the customs people do it properly. I'll give you two examples of recently of my customers when it wasn't done properly, neither that we were doing. One was a company that is involved with vaping, bringing in vaping machines from China. He phoned me up and said he's just been charged a crazy amount of money, which was actually tobacco excise, because vaping comes under the general heading of tobacco. A vaping machine isn't tobacco, so it doesn't carry excise. But if you don't start the customs entry, by overriding that and getting to the right place, you'll end up with a bill that you don't need to pay, and it can take some time to get back. We had a similar one with another customer who didn't understand why he had paid some duty on a country where there was a new deal in place and a new quota in place, and yet he was still charged duty. And it was just because the entry had been made by someone else, not us, without that knowledge. And it's important to keep up to date with that knowledge. Next slide, please. Trade deals now, they work for you. I'm not really going to talk about the trade deals. Ian's covered that and all the resources are there for it. It's just to make the point that actually you don't need a trade deal to trade with any country. There are just rules for every country. America, there's no trade deal. China, there's no trade deal. Our two biggest trading partners, okay? But you can still sell to America, you can buy from China. It just means that the rules are determined in a different way rather than a bilateral or multilateral trade agreement, okay? So that could be a mutual recognition agreement, or it could be World Trade Organization terms. And in reality, every country has some rules for every product. And there is a resource on the back slide that gets you for you to understand if I need to sell to Brazil or Iran even, what can't I sell? Does my product count? Okay. It only then becomes, secondly, about duties and taxes. So first is about access. Can I get my product into that country? If so, what are the rules? If so, what are the duties, taxes, and quotas that relate to that? Next slide, please. Now, an important thing if you're beginning to sell overseas is to understand freight quotes. You're going to need to have those quotes, and your freight forwarder is the person to do this with. You're going to need quotes for your quotes. So if you're trying to sell a machine to somebody in Brazil, you need to know what it's going to cost to get there. And that means everything, the full cost. You might see some headline prices at a time, and someone might give you a headline price that doesn't actually include the entire cost. I'll put in one example there, which is a bit extreme because it's low volume, but just to show the point that says, if I'm air freighting 15 kilos to this country at $2 a kilo, the freight charge is only $30. The actual cost, this is a real shipment, by the way, the actual cost to move those goods, it was actually to America, was $160. Okay. Now, a lot of those fees are fixed fees, so you could do a bigger shipment and the impact is less. But don't underestimate, when you look at the right-hand side, that even on big shipments of containers and other things, there are a bunch of other charges that can make the actual freight charge a smaller element. Not in the current market, but go back 18 months and we're paying $2,000 for a container from China, then all the other things that are in play there, terminal handling, inland haulage, particularly surcharges, can easily be a much larger number than that. And it's very important. So what you need to do is be able to understand them, read them, determine how you want to work with your freight forwarder and or carriers of breaking them out. Because some people will send out quotes and it's a single number. This is the door-to-door price, $5,000. When actually you want to understand all the different elements to see, is there any risk of some distress costs? Because you want to avoid distress costs, things like delays at a port. So right now, in the current market, that is a major issue. You're sending something to Los Angeles, that ship's sitting outside for four weeks. The container is taking 3 weeks sometimes to get through the port, and it's attracting additional charges. And then you get the market impacts that happen from time to time. So currently driver shortages all around the world that is increasing the cost of haulage. So sometimes the prices will change as well between you booking and actually paying. And it's very important that you try and deal with that with your freight forwarder. And lastly, at the bottom, exchange rate. Always make sure that the exchange rate that you work on for freight is fixed early. Next slide, please. So just to recap
Mike,
there.
Mike, sorry, we're getting close on time, yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to finish off with this?
If you would, please.
Yeah, sure. So this is just one shipper's habits. In very simple terms, you can read them yourself. Know the rules of every country, destination country, and the Incoterms. How long do things take? Understand how you need to pack things. Understand how you price things, how things are administered, and then get your organization aligned to meet the needs of that shipping department, particularly sales. So that's me. All that's left after that is the links, and they'll come to you when you get the copy of the slide pack. So thanks for that, Elliot.
Thanks a lot, Mike. And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
We've got time for 2 or 3 questions. And the first one is for Ian. What's your view about the global economy over the next 12 months? Do you think it's going to grow?
It was yes. I do think the economy is going to grow. I mean, it's been very, very clear over the last 18 months, 2 years that there's been a sort of a global downturn in trade and exports and in global growth. So I think globally growth slowed by 3% across the world. As we look forward and as we come out of COVID, as the world opens up, and of course the UK is actually opening up a lot quicker than some other places, which actually is causing its own challenge in terms of those other markets being open and available to export. We project growth rates of around 4% for the UK, and that's in line with other G7 countries. So government is very much kind of behind opening up of the economy, and I think you'll see some number of not reforms, but the sort of the processes that we're putting in place generally as government to try and encourage businesses to do more business generally will help to accelerate business trajectory towards that ambition of that 4% growth.
Thanks. And one for Mike. Do you think sea freight market from China is going to get back to normal? Because obviously that's a big market. And when do you see container prices coming down significantly? Because that's been a real problem, I know.
Yes, Elliot, it has, and is continuing to do so. And I think it will do until Q2 next year. First indications from the shipping lines of new what they call contracts coming out. Just for everybody to understand, there are 2 real ways that you buy sea freight. One is on a contract, which is either direct with a carrier or via a freight forwarder. And second is just on a spot market, what we call freight all kinds. Anyone who's SME will typically be using freight all kinds. And that is currently being priced every day with no more than 3 weeks price validity. Very, very short period of time. Contracts typically would be for 6 months or a year. And the shipping lines are all talking to the market at the moment about new contracts being able to be signed now. China New Year is early February, and typically those contracts are going to take place after China New Year. By the time that settles down, it's not going to really make much difference until the second quarter. And it's a little bit to do with the other issues that have caused the cost increase, which is general a big general impact on supply chains and operations caused by the COVID bounce back. The volume has been big, therefore you've got congestion in major ports and manufacturing areas, and that's going to take another few months before that gets back to some sort of normality.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a big issue for particularly for smaller companies trying to get into exporting.
Well, that's the other thing. Export prices haven't gone up as much as the China market, but they have gone up. So, for instance, just for example, 18 months ago, import from China 2,000, export to USA 2,000. China now coming in $17,500. I'm talking about, and US going out 6,000. Yeah, so the impact is different, but the impact has impacted exports. Some areas have been less impacted. Middle East less impacted. South America, South Africa have been better. Yeah.
Another one for Ian. Where on your one of your slides, I think slide 5, there was a reference to trade agreements with high growth countries. Presumably they're being heavily targeted. Is that right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, I think we are looking at countries both that are growing very quickly and are good opportunity for the UK to sort of partner with, but also the countries that want to work with us. And on a lot of those countries that are on the slide are being talked to, are in current negotiation of some stage or shape. The challenge with the process, though, is it can take up to 7 years to negotiate a free trade agreement. So, even though we started in earnest only 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of these processes are in train. It's just that the ones that I've kind of highlighted on the slide are closer to fruition than the others, but we're in a constant sort of state of negotiation with various countries, including very high growth countries as well.
And just going back to Mike, there's been a question about expectations for containers coming into the UK from India. What's the cost implications there? Are they going up as well, or likely to come down?
They have gone up. We suspect India will come down before China. One thing about the Indian market, and when you're working with a freight forwarder, is the best. Buying freight over the years has been a mixture of things. If you want to buy freight historically from China in the UK, the best place to buy it is in the UK. If you want to buy freight from India to come into the UK, the best place to buy that freight is in India. Now, your freight forwarder will do, your UK freight forwarder will get that arranged for you, but it is a very, very a locally dominated market. The Indian market dominates and controls its own resources and costs. The China market is much more dominated by global trade, and therefore the buying pressure over the years has always been historically the determining factor on the price out of China and not out of India. It's been the sellers' issues out of India. Having said that, India has always been relatively low cost, relatively efficient for the difficulty of the domestic country and getting goods to port. But we expect India to come down before China.
Thanks for that, and thank you both very much for your talks this morning, which I know have been well received. And also the questions. We've not been able to ask you all the questions, but we'll try and pass one or two of them on for you to be able to respond, which we'll pick up on after the event. So now my pleasure is to introduce our next speaker, which is Nicola Winters, who's head of international digital marketing for Search Laboratory, and who will be helping us spot the international digital growth opportunities in the world of e-commerce. Now, Nicola currently heads up a team working across the globe in over 35 languages for a variety of clients, including the likes of Citrix, Office Depot, and Hootsuite, and ensuring that they get the best case studies and insights into new markets. She's also done a lot of work in the SEO space. E-commerce has mushroomed during the pandemic, with a report from McKinsey & Company saying that 83% of business executives believe that selling via e-commerce is more effective than just face-to-face selling. Nicola's going to help us with her thoughts about how we can take advantage of the opportunities out there. So, Nicola, over to you.
Well, thanks for that, Elliot. And good morning, everybody. I'm, very excited to be talking at this event. I just think it's a bit of a shame that I can't see you all in person, but thanks for joining us online. So like Elliot was saying, I wanted to spend some time today talking about international growth opportunities, but more importantly, how to spot the opportunities for your brands. And I guess like the last 18 months has been pretty chaotic for everybody. But, the pandemic, it has caused internet penetration levels to increase and e-commerce uptake across the globe as well. So as you can imagine, it's opened up many opportunities to explore, entering new markets and broadening that audience reach. And I guess just to explain a little bit about me and why I'm talking about this topic, if we can just move on to the next slide. So like Elliot was saying, I head up the international department at Search Laboratory. So essentially that is a team of mother tongue digital practitioners, and we help to deliver growth campaigns across both paid and organic channels. And we're constantly putting together resources, articles and guides to help brands through that process. And they can be found on our website. So I guess, spotting growth opportunities is essentially what we do all day, every day for our clients. But right now it's more relevant than ever. And so just to kind of set the scene about kind of what's happening within my industry at the moment, I wanted to touch upon a recent Google report. This was commissioned like a Forrester report late last year. And it was looking at what senior decision makers within EMEA businesses were identifying as a priority over the next 3 years. Next slide, please. So some of the findings were that more than half of the brands that were surveyed by Google said that expansion into international territories was important and it was on their agenda for the next 3 years. Next, please. But of that 53%, over 80% want their agencies to be able to address this for them. And I guess that just means that it's not unusual that we need to sort of ask for support or further insights. Sometimes it's just the level of detail and data that we can get out of certain software and platforms that usually only agencies have hold of. And then just the next slide, this just kind of highlights that even of the agencies that were surveyed within this report, over 80% of those agencies rank export as important or very important to their business roadmap. And I guess this just means that, we all need to be confident, comfortable and proactive. I think that's the key word here, in providing those essential market insights that will drive a return on the very investment needed in the first place. So next slide, please. Why now? Well, there's plenty of reasons, but I think what I wanted to just touch upon, if we can just move on to the next one, was that cross-border trade has seen a steady rise over the years. This is nothing new. This was something that started right in the early 60s, and it shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon. And the global pandemic as well has caused a massive shift in the way that people engage with brands, in the way that they consume their goods. And in fact, in quite a lot of markets, it's almost forced a lot of businesses to become more digitalized, but also it's forced more people online as well. And just touching upon that growth figure, Google themselves has sort of forecasted that in the next 5 years, they expect, the amount of internet users on a global scale to rise by a massive 20%. Now, the reason why I say massive is because that's almost 1 billion new users online in the next 5 years. And actually, what's quite interesting is on the next slide, if we kind of look at the last billion users that came online most recently, then actually what this map highlights is that half of those users came from what we call these emerging markets. And I guess what that means for you guys and for our clients as well is that online businesses can start selling across borders and accessing markets with 10 times that of our population. So how can we take advantage of this? This is unfortunately where a lot of businesses sort of start and then stop their expansion. It's expensive. We know that it's time consuming. There can be quite a few risks involved as well, particularly if you're working across different languages, different cultures. It could even be that we're not working with familiar platforms like the marketplaces or resellers like Amazon or social media platforms. They might vary across the different territories. And so at Search Laboratory, we have a bit of a process, a step-by-step process for success, really. And one that I wanted to touch upon today was the first step, which is all about being able to identify. This is all in the data. So it's what data do we need to obtain? Where do we get that from? And then how do we use it to almost provide a forecast for the type of performance that we should expect in a new territory? When it comes to launching, whether it's a full website or it could just be a product list for a marketplace or a reseller, we still need to make sure that we are linguistically faithful, particularly if we need to localize some of our content. We also need to make sure that we are culturally compliant as well. So we're using the right sort of payment methods. We've got the right customer service options available on site. And then the third step, it seems an obvious one, but actually this is where a lot of businesses struggle. We need to make sure that we are connecting with our audience at every stage of the buying funnel and almost driving them through that decision-making process. And so I wanted to just touch upon how you guys could take advantage of these growth opportunities. So if we can just move on to the next slide. To get started, there are probably a few questions that you need to ask yourself. And the first one being, which markets have the highest demand for my product or service? So this can be found a lot of the time in the SEO world. It's called keyword research, but it's just understanding how users in the first place are searching for anything related to your product. And then what level of competition should I expect as well? So this could be advertising spend. So how much does it cost and how much are my competitors paying to sort of advertise in this space on these sorts of terms? But also, what space are you going to be dominating? How many global competitors are there compared to local? And then an obvious one, but how much should I invest to acquire a new customer? We should all be aware that retaining customers is a much cheaper strategy than obtaining new customers in a new market with probably quite low brand awareness as well. So if we're going to do this, we need to be able to do it properly. But to answer that question, how much should I invest? We really need to have an idea of what potential revenue could I expect and almost set out a staging sort of project so that with every piece of investment that we do, we can see a return before expanding further. Next slide, please. So starting with gathering this data, there are a lot of metrics that we can sort of use to give us this overview. Some that we use within Search Laboratory is we look at the online population of a particular market. We will also look at the volume behind certain search terms and queries, and we'll also look at the seasonality, whether there's been any growth across any categories within particular markets. We'll look at the typical online spend and disposable income of our audience within that market as well. And then we'll look at sort of competitors and how do we exploit the opportunity. Now, to do this, we can utilize some of the free tools that are out there. And actually on the screen right now, these are some ones that are provided directly by Google. They are free to use and they give you a really good idea of you as a business with your domestic website right now. What type of work do you need to put in to be successful in a new market? And at Search Laboratory, we're constantly looking into the data. We provide, on the next slide, you'll see we use the Market Explorer tool by Google, and we present all of the opportunities on this dashboard. This is a Data Studio dashboard. So you can, if we created one of these for yourself, you can navigate through them. And the sort of views that this includes is markets by interest. So this will be things like the category growth, the market growth, the country's cost per click. So how much is it to advertise on certain keywords, but also the estimated cost per acquisition and the return on ad spend as well. So as you can imagine, you can really drill down into the opportunities and make a decision based on your business, your time, your budget, and the resource available to you. This example here was actually taken from a client of ours, Burton Snowboards. So they provide winter sports gear. And as you can imagine, the pandemic, massively affected this brand. If we can just move on to the next slide. They actually came to us, Burton, because they were struggling to perform well across certain markets. And we made sure that we brought in some native speakers to improve the performance of the existing accounts that they had running. But we also launched, after looking into the data, into the French market. And that was back in 2016 now. But what's interesting is that 10% of all paid revenue now comes from that market alone. And in 2021, so that, we're still dealing with travel restrictions and everything to do with the pandemic, we have actually launched paid campaigns successfully in another 3 markets for Burton Snowboards, 2 of which are not English speaking. So the opportunities are there. It's just making sure that we can find them. Now, once we've spotted those opportunities, actually, it's really important that we consider what we need to do to be successful in that market. So if we move on to the next slide, I know that when we're thinking about globalization, it's a journey, and there are lots of sort of steps along the way. And really, we wanted to provide almost like a one-stop shop, if you like, for clients in this who are going through this process. But some things that I wanted to talk to you about today that are highlighted on the screen are logistics. So are we using the right preferred delivery or returns method for that country? When it comes to customer services as well, are we offering the right sort of options? When we talk about localization, this isn't just translation. This is thinking about the user experience, the imagery online, right down to global payments. Are we satisfying the payment need? And are we seen as providing a safe and secure checkout for users? There are many differences online. So, for example, in Germany, bank transfer is still one of the most preferred methods of payment rather than a credit or debit card. And so that's just one thing to bear in mind when selling in these markets. So one way of looking at where you're starting from and what is a priority for your brand, I wanted to talk about the Market Finder tool. So this is a tool from Google. Again, it's free, but it gives you an export score. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. All you need to do is go onto the Market Finder platform, enter in your URL, and it will give you a bit of a competitive score. It will give you an overview of your operational ability in that market, as well as giving you a quick overview of marketing performance as well. So if we move on to the next slide, what it will give you is just an idea of your starting position. So it'll look at your operational abilities. It'll look at things at the payment fit. It will look at things like customer care options, and it will look at the localization as well. Localization is important. 82% of shoppers more likely to buy if promotional material is in their own language. So use the Market Finder tool to look what languages is being used to search for my products, because if we go on to the next slide, it might seem obvious that if you are selling in Japan, you're going to sell in Japanese, France, French, and so on. But actually, by using this tool, you can uncover some nuances. So if we move on to the next slide, what this will show is, yes, in France, the query share is over 88% in French. That means that we need to think about a localization strategy if we were entering the market for France. But when we look at India, what we're seeing in certain industries, particularly B2B, over 98% of the searches are all performed in English, meaning that we can still sell in English. We probably don't need to invest in a big localization project. It's all about your time and resource.
Nicola,
last slide. I was just going to say, move on to my summary. There's only 2 slides. I just wanted to finish by saying the pandemic, it's opened up many doors for brands. The opportunities can be found in the data, and there are a lot of free tools available. Please do think about those considerations though. And if you do need any other help, we have got access to some exclusive data. So do get in touch with either myself or David Slater at Search Laboratory. Thank you, and sorry for going over a little bit.
No, not at all, Nicola. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll save the questions up until after the final speaker before the break.
Okay.
Is John Robinson, who's a board member of and education advisor to the Institute of Export and International Trade. And he's going to talk to us about how SMEs should respond to online international inquiries. He has his own agency called Texa, where he spent 28 years specializing in export practice and training. And since 1994, he's been a lecturer at New College, Nottingham, on the subject of international marketing and business ethics. He's also a board member of East Midlands Chamber. All this comes after a successful career in the RAF and a senior post at NATO HQ. So if anyone can talk with confidence about international trade, it's him. So John, what can you tell us about international inquiries?
Thank you for that brilliant, if not slightly overhead introduction of it. Good morning, everyone. In talking about SMEs, for me, the important question is which SMEs? They can range from micro businesses of less than 10 employees to those with 250. And I have to be honest from the start and say my personal focus for assistance in exporting is the smaller end of that huge bracket. I shall explain why at the end. Nevertheless, some of my comments this morning could easily apply to larger organisations. So if the cap fits, wear it. We heard just now from Nicola that international trade has gone, or is in the final stages of going, completely digital. I make no apology for the restatement of that blindingly obvious statement, because practically it means that anyone, anywhere in the world, can view your website, and if it is set up that way, can order goods. Great. Or is it? On the face of it, yes, but there's a big but, based on a few very pertinent questions. I shall now deal with this personal focus of mine for a while at least. Suppose that as a result of a website viewing, what if a small SME got an order for, say, 2,000 of their products? Terrific. Really? Small guys out there, you need to ask a fundamental question. What is the maximum order size we could possibly cope with? It's a very important question, but it raises several others. Firstly, who is the order from? A business or a consumer? This distinction is very important. Businesses all over the world readily accept the concept of lead times. Consumers don't. In general, when consumers order something, they want it delivered yesterday or the very next day at the latest. Delayed delivery is one of the fastest ways to lose a customer, with the possible poor reputational publicity as well. Then there is the question of where the order is based. Not only could your product, okay, perhaps I'm going slightly off beam here, but I need to make a point. Not only could your product to the country in question be in contravention of a UN sanction, but it might be prohibited by an individual country. Let me give you some examples. Films. Sensible, definitely non-adult films, 8mm, 16mm, 35mm, whether for entertainment or training or corporate promotions, are banned entirely from import into Saudi Arabia. Also banned into Saudi are electronic cigarettes, audio or visual tapes, televisions, and even legitimate copies of the holy book, the Quran. Here, I'm talking about total bans, prohibitions. But additionally, there are restrictions on a wide range of other goods, and Saudi is not unique. All countries operate a list of their own, or have their own prohibited and restricted items. The question is, could your product be on such a list somewhere? Speaking of your product, how easily will it travel? Does it have a recognizable shelf life? And what effect would customs delays have on that? Answers to the main question about shelf life do not prevent your product from being exportable or importable. They simply mean that careful thought and planning needs to go into exporting it. I mentioned Saudi Arabia earlier, but talking about countries in general also raises the question of why the order came to you from there in the first place. Did you quote a price? In what currency did you expect to be paid? And is this clear on the website? At what exchange rate do you expect any conversion to be carried out? If you did quote a price, did it cover the costs of any customs duty and VAT? At what rates? And how do you propose to keep this price updated? If you did not quote a price, why has this message come into you in the first place? If it was only an inquiry, the question remains how you're going to respond. This raises the question of language, which Nicola also raised. I fully accept that your website will probably be in English, but I ask the question from this point of view. Many countries around the world have separate cultures within them. Completely different cultures, speaking completely different languages. This does not happen only on the other side of the world. What about right on our doorstep? Belgium. The two separate cultures, speaking French and Walloon, exist quite separately and are even antagonistic towards each other over some issues. So what percentage of the population in the responding country is your website, presumably in English, attracting? And what could the effect of this be on any other culture in that country? How could you realistically approach any other culture within that same marketplace? I said my concerns in this presentation to a large degree has been directed at the smaller end of the SME spectrum. And the reason for this is because the larger SMEs have already addressed these questions and they have a properly thought out export strategy for approaching carefully researched and selected markets. And that, if your exports are going to grow, is how the process is best organized. There are some very well published strategies for researching potential export markets, and for basic viability, they work. A couple of those, with those of you with a business studies background might be familiar with, are PESTEL and SWOT. But all this relies on a response from a respective or prospective customer. Is there anything an SME of any size can do towards generating its own export growth on its own initiative? Short answer is yes, but it tends to be product dependent. And here I must take a couple of seconds to endorse Ian Harrison's earlier presentation. The UK government publishes via a specific website details of all requests from traders anywhere in the world, and it's the website that Ian mentioned, great.gov.uk. last week, I counted approximately 20,000 overseas requests for UK products across all sectors. It's worth having a quick look at this website. Is it possible, Tech, that you can get a hyperlink on that website? We'll have a go. Yes, and here we are. Just scroll up till we get down to the sectors. Look at individuals, Cuba, Jamaica, Poland, and just stop there, because look at the sector links where all requests for UK products are divided by great.gov.uk. Terrific sector, the complete, I have to say, the complete span of sectors of UK trade. Wow, fantastic source of information about who in the world is wanting what from the UK in particular. But even if you estimate that your company is not yet in that sort of league, or in the league for possible consideration, it will certainly give you an idea of some of the potential markets to have a look at. And back then to the basic research strategies I spoke about earlier. I said at the start that I would make clear the reasons for my personal focus on the smaller SMEs. It's quite straightforward. UK markets, domestic market, in any sector is extremely competitive and very hard won. You don't need me to tell you. Export markets offer, by simply learning a few export procedures, an easier sale. Growth tends to be easier because not all of your UK competitors are in there wanting to export. Despite, as we've just seen, the UK enjoying a worldwide reputation for excellence, as the website demonstrated. You saw on that website how UK products are in demand. But we need to start small and learn about how our overseas export markets grow, and learn about them in order to grow. From the point of view of UK PLC, we are not, it's no secret, we're not as a country self-sustaining. We need to export in order to balance our books on the economy. And I have to say, my purely personal view is that it is far better to rely on, for example, 1 million small companies exporting a vast range of products than to rely on a couple of massive corporate players, massive corporate players waiting to win huge value international contracts. So for my part, I shall continue to do everything I can to help these small entrepreneurs. But for now, I see that to stick to the program, I need to wind up. Let me broadly summarize this talk on the final slide here. We have that summary. And to all of you, I say thank you for listening. I'm happy to deal with any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we'll see what questions come up. Well, we've got one for Nicola, and it was about testing out markets, particularly for somebody going into exporting for the first time. If you wanted to test a few markets, what would your advice be? And for example, is it best to target by language or by country?
Yeah, we often come across this because, you know, when we sift through the data, what could become apparent is that there are opportunities in France, Germany, and Poland. And of course, you know, one of the ways that we sort of take our clients through it is a staging project. It's almost like, let's test the waters once we've got our own data on performance, that's when we'll move to the next stage of a localization project and whatever. There are a couple of ways you can test performance, and there are pros and cons associated with absolutely every one. Depending on what you're selling, if you're like a retail client, you're selling products on your site, then my advice would be to build out some localized landing pages for your key products. This can just be on your domestic website, and it doesn't mean that you have to have a full localized website. It's just a couple of product pages. Make sure that they've got, the right sort of terms and conditions, and all of the information is localized, and stick some, budget behind a paid advertising campaign just on your head terms. And if you have, all three of those active at the same time, then at least you can, sift through your own data and sort of make a decision of which performed the best. And does this suit our sort of business? Like I said, there are pros and cons with that, though. We've got to understand that if we are a new brand in a market, there's going to be certain trust signals for that user. And if they can't navigate around your site and find an About Us page or a customer services page, that might affect conversions. But it's definitely a way to get your own data first, and then sort of move into bigger projects down the line. The question about targeting a language or a country, I feel like I'm fobbing you off with the whole "it depends" again. But it does massively depend on what it is that you're selling. My advice would be that there's nothing wrong with doing either or, but I guess we would only really target a language if the experience for the user doesn't change, only the language changes. So an example of that would be Zoom, for example. We'd only need to localize the platform into French, German, Italian, and etc. But the actual platform is exactly the same, in which case we target language. If instead, we're actually selling products, we're a retail sort of website, then we've got to target country, because only at that point can you start to localize things like the payment methods, the logistics, the delivery, the customer service options. It's all of those kind of barriers for users to convert. So yeah, my advice would be always, if we need to culturally fit into a market, then we target the country. But if we're giving the same experience, the only thing that's changing is the language, then we target language rather than country.
So just to clarify, if you're talking about a small SME, sort of going into exporting for the first time with obviously limited resources,
yeah,
presumably that they might be wanting to target English-speaking countries because they won't have the additional cost of having translation available both on the website and in terms of salespeople. Would that be fair comment?
Yes, it would. But I see this happen all too often, and actually, it translation, localization. It's an extra expense, but actually, often that is where the opportunities lie. So, yes, it's always much cheaper to target an English-speaking market. However, don't. Excuse my language here, but don't be lazy in assuming that just because the language is English, that everything else around your website, everything that they're going to experience is the same as we. Even, next day delivery, shipping methods, the UK have a very different attitude to Australia, very different attitude to the US. So yeah, always consider that. My last piece of advice actually was going to be, don't think that you have to do this by yourself. There are marketplaces out there, shopping platforms. I would definitely utilize those to test the water as well in certain markets.
Thank you. And John, just one for you, because I'm conscious that we're coming up to break time. There's no doubt that exporting is full of potential hiccups, particularly ones in documentation required for somewhere or other. What can very small SMEs do going into exporting for the first time as the best ways around this?
Very fair question. Wow, a bit like outline the history of thought in the next 30 seconds.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. The answer is, to my way of thinking, there is a plethora of advice out there. We've heard an awful lot of it this morning. Starting off with, all right, if you want to think big picture, broad, with Ian's presentation from UK HMG. But also, Nicola made some valuable points with her presentation, but also Mike as well. A reliable freight forwarder is a mine of information on documentation, for example, because they're right on the cusp of it. They deal with it day to day. It's their bread and butter. So there is plenty of information out there. I suppose in many ways, yes, there's too much information out there. It's just a question of selecting for the SME. It's a question of selecting the most appropriate, be it freight forwarder, be it my own institute, the Institute of Export. That's what it's there for. But it's depends on which bit of the documentation that you want to address. Certainly, I endorse Ian's comments about if you've got a product which is going to be the subject of an export license, then the first place to go, the only place to go in many respects, is UK government. But on the other hand, the local Chamber of Commerce, for us the East Midlands, but any local Chamber of Commerce, if we're talking, if we have a national audience here, your local Chamber of Commerce as well. There's a lot of information out there on documentation, and a lot of it is highly specialised.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Nicola, and to all our speakers this morning. It's been quite comprehensive. We've gone through a lot in a relatively short space of time, but as I mentioned earlier, copies of the slides will be circulated to all the participants, and the ability to be able to feed questions back through us, we can try and get you some answers. So it's now time for a short comfort break of 10 minutes to give you time to have a cup of tea or coffee as well. Now we're going to start back promptly at 10:40. So in 10 minutes time, and I know that the panel will be able to sort of add some meat to the bones of some of the discussions that we've had already this morning. So thank you for listening so far, and we'll see you all in 10 minutes time. Thank you.